Why are we here? We're here to launch this document, a Green New Deal for the Leeds City region. You may know that it's a co-production between an independent think tank called the Greenhouse and GALBA, which is the Group for Action on Leeds Bradford Airport. GALBA's been going now for over 2 years, and it was formed to really to fight back against the plans that the airport submitted to expand their passenger numbers. Why did we do that? Well, firstly, because a large number of us were very concerned about the effects this would have on climate change. And secondly, a lot of people, certainly locally to the Leeds area, were worried and upset about the potential for increased noise locally, increased traffic, and the associated congestion and emissions from motor traffic. So we've been going for 2 years, trying to constructively contribute to the debate. I would like to emphasise now that we emphatically don't want to close down the airport. People have suggested that that's our ultimate motive. It isn't. We don't want to close down the airport. We just don't want it to get any bigger than it is already. So here's the report. The link to getting a virtual copy, a digital copy, will be added to the chat. I think it's already in the chat space now. I'm getting a yes from Clancy. So you can download it and read it at your leisure. It's a long read, but there's a very helpful executive summary, which I certainly found worthwhile reading before I started reading the report in its entirety. So what do we mean when we say a Green New Deal? Well, we have a vision, and we're not alone. There are groups all around the country and all around the world trying to think about how we can move from where we are now, a high carbon economy, to a low carbon economy. And this isn't a matter of choice. We have to do this. There's no option. The only alternative is to have 3 or maybe 4 or even more degrees of global heating by the end of this century. And that will make our civilization and the lives of billions of wild animals around the world just completely impossible. And so we say this has to be done. There is no genuine alternative. So there are 4 speakers we have lined up for you. I'd like to thank them for coming this afternoon and giving their time. Alex Sobel will speak first. He is, of course, the Labour MP for Leeds North West, and it's in his constituency, or should I say the constituency which he represents, that the airport sits. After that, Nick Hodgkinson, who he probably doesn't like me to say this, but I regard him as the intellectual powerhouse of our group GALBA. He'll speak. Then we'll have a contribution from Robert McGowan, and big welcome to him because he contributed a lot to the report that we've produced. He's from Greenhouse think tank. And lastly, Pauline Bailey, who will speak, and she's coming from the Leeds Trade Union Council. And it's an important point to underline that the local trades unions support our plan. That's important to say that. So we're expecting, and we do invite and welcome questions throughout, but we do ask that all the speakers are finished, and then we'll know where best to direct those questions. So I think we're saying, are we saying questions on the chat line, Clancy? Yeah, she's nodding again. So yeah, if you can type your question briefly into chat, we'll take as many as we possibly can. If you've submitted a question in advance, then we'll come to those first. So at this point, I'll stop talking and hand over to Alex Sobel, MP.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to GALBA and Greenhouse for producing this report. It's actually very important when we're talking about the airport to think about it in the round. So obviously, and I supported the fact that the airport shouldn't expand its flights from 4 million to 7 million, and that the airport shouldn't attach that expansion to the new terminal building, which is why I opposed the planning application, which is now with the Secretary of State. But today really is about looking at the airport site, and for me, the town of Yeadon and the surrounding towns and areas in the round, and the impact that the land around the airport has and what potential it has. And that's why this report is so important, because when we think about the sort of West Yorkshire and employment sites, a lot of major employment sites are in city centres, Leeds city centre, Bradford city centre. And what we need is to diversify the number of employment sites we have. And the places that are good at employment sites are places where there's a lot of brownfield land and good transport links. Leeds Bradford International Airport has a lot of brownfield land that isn't used for aviation now, and potentially in the future could have even more brownfield sites that are not used for aviation. In terms of transport, it isn't actually that well linked currently, but with the plans for a new Parkway station, which is right by a utilisable brownfield site, which isn't the airport but is car parking and other pieces of land, and Mayor Tracy Braben's commitment to run one of the tram lines to Otley via Yeadon and the airport, that creates potential for great connectivity and means, as well as potentially being able to put jobs there, means taking commuters out of those really heavy roads running into Bradford and Leeds city centre. We need to diversify our employment sites. The report really highlights some of the areas where this is possible and links it to the sort of perverse incentives there are for aviation, considering the climate emergency we are facing. So, the sort of potential we have, already think about where our strengths are as a region. There's real opportunities here for development of low carbon manufacturing in energy. So, for instance, William Cook site in Leeds produces casting for offshore wind turbines. There's a big potential for the wind industry, production of solar panels, production, again, in Sheffield, we've got the largest green energy producer, green hydrogen producer in Europe at ITM Power. They're looking for expansion. Leeds Bradford International Airport provides sites where you could produce electrolyzers for green hydrogen. And that actually links to the aviation industry's own plans around decarbonisation. I'll come on to those in a moment. And then there's a whole range of other things. If you think about production of insulation for retrofitting housing, that's probably the biggest immediate task we have, which the government, to be honest, have sort of stopped, start and really failed to have a mass insulation programme, but we really need to get to. So there's a whole range of opportunities for that land around Leeds Bradford, which would create jobs. And the report says, the potential for 16,000 jobs. That is pretty much everybody of working age in the town of Yeadon. So I'm not saying that all those jobs are going to people in Yeadon, but that would provide a huge opportunity for local people to work in clean tech and climate related industries. The issues around sort of aviation itself are quite stark. So Chris mentioned this. The aviation industry thinks that it can reduce emissions by 50% by 2030, but these are nearly all in untested technologies. So sustainable aviation fuel is the main one, which actually requires the building of lots of new refineries around the coast. The technology is still nascent. The planes haven't been built, haven't been developed, so they're planning a lot of retrofit on their own planes. Then there's electric aviation. The only electronic aviation now is for a single pilot. So how many years it will be until that is feasible. And the other one's hydrogen. Again, we haven't got working models of hydrogen planes. And all of these planes actually are all propeller planes. When was the last time, I know people here probably never fly, how was the last time you knew somebody who went on holiday on a propeller plane? Doesn't really happen. Everybody uses jet aviation now if they're flying more than 300 or 400 miles. So it's so we've got those issues. Secondly, the current tax system, APD and aviation fuel tax, is ridiculously low considering the climate emergency. If you compare the price, and everybody does this, of a domestic flight to the equivalent train journey, the domestic flight always wins. However far in advance you are booking. And we need to reverse that cycle. The other thing is that who flies, the vast majority of people who fly are actually a very small number of people, 70% of flights by 15% of people. And so that's why I've always advocated for a frequent flyer levy. And actually, we can utilise that levy to be put into those other industries, whether that's through transport or through clean tech. I'm just going to finish very shortly on the trains theme. Connectivity in the north of England is really important. If we're going to make Leeds Bradford Airport a major employment hub of 16,000 people, people need to be able to get to the sort of the hubs to be able to get there by public transport. And the cancellation of the Northern Powerhouse Rail between Leeds and Manchester through the centre of Bradford is a huge setback. So so we need, as well as the things in the report, we need to build other public transport infrastructure around it. And I'm just going to finish because I was asked by Helen Pickering just to talk a little bit about what Labour would do if we were in government. So Labour is committed to spending £28 billion on a clean tech revolution. So, whether you want to call it the Green New Deal or Green Industrial Revolution or Green Industrial Strategy, they're all more or less the same thing. They're in the same box. But the commitment from Labour is £28 billion a year over 8 years. That's, I'm just going to do some quick maths here, £124 billion of climate measures. And that would, what we're talking about today in that report, that would fully fund a lot of the infrastructure costs for us to be able to develop those new industries at Leeds Bradford International Airport.
Alex, thank you very much for that very concise contribution. Forgive me, Alex, I've omitted to say when I was introducing you that you're also chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Net Zero, so a person who is deeply involved in the discussions that are going on at the moment and deeply knowledgeable, I'm sure. Can we now go on to Nick Hodgkinson? He is a member of GALBA and has been membership secretary since the outset and has campaigned with GALBA from the very formation of this group, and has been active in community campaigns all his life and was for 30 years a welfare rights advocate. He had to retire due to illness. So Nick, over to you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chris. I'll just start by saying that GALBA's motivation for producing the report is the need to face up to 4 facts. First, the climate crisis is a real and present danger. Second, to prevent its worst effects, climate scientists say that every sector of our economy must cut its emissions in half by 2030. Third, climate scientists also tell us that it is not possible for the aviation industry to cut its emissions in half by 2030 if it continues to expand. Fourth, people need and deserve secure, meaningful work. So those 4 facts means that we must and we can change our economy to create a better future for everyone. So because we have to cut emissions, because that can't happen quickly enough for aviation, we say that expanding airports is the wrong way to go. But we reject any suggestion that creating good jobs and protecting the climate are somehow 2 opposing forces. On the contrary, working to prevent climate breakdown, along with restoring services in care, health, and education, offers the richest source of employment in the coming years. So our vision is for a forward-looking, ambitious, and sustainable economy. An economy that reduces our dependence on aviation and on other high-carbon industries by investing in jobs for our local communities, jobs that would also tackle other key challenges we face around transport, energy supply, and housing. The detailed research behind the report shows that nearly 16,000 long-term jobs could be created in Leeds City region by pursuing such an investment strategy, with nearly double that number in the 10-year transition phase. Our focus on retrofitting homes, renewable energy, and sustainable transport would also help to tackle fuel poverty and would improve access to employment, education, and training. We know that workers in the aviation industry, as in many other sectors, have been hard hit by the pandemic, and we say their skills must be recognised and used as we make the transition to a sustainable economy. We also say the government must change the current regressive tax system that gives huge tax breaks to the aviation industry. On a per passenger basis, this public subsidy is worth £94 million a year to Leeds Bradford Airport, but it primarily benefits a minority of better off frequent flyers. This is simply not the time to restart the aviation industry's business as usual growth model. We need to rethink the role of aviation in our society so that it can operate within planetary limits. Our report also sets out a critique of the claims made by Leeds Bradford Airport about job creation. We say these claims do not properly take into account the impact of the pandemic on how and how often people will choose to travel in the future, nor does it properly consider the effect of increasing automation in airport operations, which will actually reduce the number of jobs as people are replaced by machines and self-service. We also look at the experience of other airport expansions where the number of new jobs was significantly overestimated by airport owners. Importantly, we should remember, Leeds Bradford Airport expansion would increase its emissions to 1,227,000 kilotons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. It doesn't really mean much as a number. So to put it in perspective, that's larger than the entire carbon budget for the whole of Leeds district from the year 2030 onwards. Our generation has seen the emergence of a human-created climate emergency. We must also be the generation to fix this, and we can do that by making the best use of our best resource, which is our people. So in this report, we call on all leaders in Leeds City region to recognise where investment can most usefully be made for the long term, and we ask them to use their influence with government to create a fairer, greener tax system, one that encourages the changes that are needed for the sake of everybody's future. Thank you. That's me done. Calling Chris Foran.
I don't usually forget to unmute, but it always happens when you're under pressure, doesn't it? Robert McGowan is our next contributor. He's a policy advisor and a core group member of the Greenhouse think tank, and co-authored the report that we're introducing today. He's also a member of the PCS, Public and Commercial Services Union. And he also co-authored the report called A Green New Deal for Gatwick, which was published jointly by Greenhouse, the PCS Union, and Green New Deal UK. And that report came out in the midst of the aviation jobs crisis in November 2020. So, Robert, if you're ready to go, please make a start.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, and thanks, Nick, and thanks, everyone. Brilliant to see so many people on the call. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm not from Leeds, but really pleased that on behalf of the Green European Foundation and on behalf of Greenhouse Think Tank, that my colleague Jonathan and I have been able to contribute to this important report. So campaigns against airport expansion are really growing rapidly around the UK, around Europe, all around the world at the moment. And as Nick and others have said, the climate and environmental argument for that is pretty well established. But what our work does and what this report seeks to do is to really get at the economic choices that are at play. And it's often presented as a false choice. It's a bit of a simple trade-off. Either you get the economic benefits of expansion or you get no economic benefits and nothing really changes. But this is just quite far from the truth. And it's really important to invest, but the type of investment matters. Some investments are better for jobs and livelihoods than others. So I'll give a little bit more detail on what the big findings are of this report, building on what Nick has said. But first, I'll just give a little bit of information on the context. So next slide, please. There is a serious challenge that is not unique to Leeds, and it's not unique to the UK. A lot of our work builds on the European Mobility Atlas, and that shows that you have this challenge to reduce emissions while connecting people to each other and creating good quality jobs. I'll link to that document in the chat because it gives a bit of a wider perspective that can be really helpful. And then we have the pandemic, of course, in the mix. That created this impression that there is no work, and that stimulated a lot of our work in aviation and the just transition originally. 40% of aviation jobs were at risk globally, a huge figure. 200,000 jobs, almost 200,000 jobs were lost across Europe, and airport towns in the UK had some of the fastest rising unemployment rates in the country because of the pandemic. We know that Leeds Bradford made 100 of its employees redundant, almost a quarter of its immediate workforce, the direct employees of Leeds Bradford Airport. And we know now that the recovery in passenger numbers is stunted because of restrictions. But even if that weren't the case, and this is really important, the recovery would take a long amount of time, if ever occurring at all. And so the next slide shows a graph which the New Economics Foundation produced, which just shows that the last major crisis to really hit aviation, and it's kind of a recurring thing when you look at the history of aviation, the aviation industry. The last major crisis, you see passenger numbers taking a long time to recover, 6-7 years, but eventually recovering and shooting up eventually by 30%. But you'll see from that bottom yellow line that jobs numbers never recovered. So the expectation needs to be that it will take a long time for jobs numbers to recover. But this perception that there is no work is just not right. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. There is a huge amount of work to be done to get our economies on the right path, and that carries extraordinary potential. And that's the basis for this report. So next slide, please. This is the first of our findings. The current and future jobs claims coming out of Leeds Bradford Airport are quite misleading. The jobs supported moniker, really that goes far beyond what anyone would generally construe as a job that's supported by the airport. So the actual number that are directly supported is 2,400, and the actual number forecast to be additional as a result of the expansion, as a result of the massive increase in passenger numbers, is 1,460. And that would be about a 2/3 increase on current levels. That argument has been going back and forward between GALBA and the airport over the last year. But what we've done in this report is we've looked at the historic examples. And the next slide shows a graph, which is a bit of work that we've done to look at two major airport expansions, both airports which are a little bit bigger than Leeds. So Bristol Airport did expand passenger numbers by 93%, huge expansion, almost doubling in size. And they expected employment to grow in its master plan between 2006 and 2015 by 2/3, the same as what Leeds forecasts. In fact, jobs numbers only grew by 23%. Birmingham Airport, over a similar period from 2007, grew passenger numbers by almost half. They again expected a 2/3 increase in jobs and actually only got 7% increase in employment. Other airports over this same period, employment numbers shrank. And in the UK, across the board, they remained broadly flat, despite a massive expansion in passenger numbers. So what this correlates is with the existing work that's been done by the New Economics Foundations, the foundation which identifies the trajectory for employment intensity to fall in airports. That means that even if passenger numbers do rise, you're not going to get the jobs dividend that you might hope for. And then the next slide, there's this other point which we try to illustrate here, which is about the idea of a two-way road. That means economic activity leaves Leeds as a result of the airport expansion, as well as arriving in it. And if there's a significant imbalance in that two-way road, as you can see here, as there is in Leeds, then a lot more economic activity is going to be leaving the area than arriving in it. And that's a really important point that gets overlooked, and it is often overlooked in the business cases that are produced for airport expansion. So that's the first major finding, is about casting a more skeptical eye on the claims made by Leeds Bradford. Second major finding, in the next slide, is about the tax breaks which are granted to Leeds Bradford Airport. We know that the aviation sector is, well, I do, but you might know the aviation sector is VAT exempt. Its fuel is tax free, so you actually pay much more for petrol than you would for the kerosene that goes into a flight. So it's much cheaper to burn that fuel in the air, where it's more damaging to the atmosphere than it even is on the ground. So that's the unique status for this industry. And that total subsidy, when you add up how much that actually costs central government, it adds up to £7 billion every year. It's a huge commitment from government to subsidise this industry and sustain it the way it has been able to grow. And if you work that out for Leeds Bradford's share, you find that based on the proportion of its flights of overall UK flights, its share is 94 million a year. And compare that to the type of investment that we're talking about that we want to see more of. Leeds City Council's energy efficiency programme amounts to 100 million over 5 years. So it's just a fifth of that subsidy. So this is about economic choices, and there are big choices that are being made, and there are different choices that could be made. So next slide, please. We'll move on to the third and final finding. We propose a Green New Deal that's rooted in the needs of local communities. Now, it's important to caveat this. This is not a ready-made blueprint for anyone in local or even central government to pick up and implement. It's a vision to show the scale of potential, the opportunities that exist in the alternative. This data that we're using here in this report builds on a major climate jobs modelling project which Greenhouse ran back in 2018. The model estimates jobs requirements to reach net zero by 2030 across key sectors, and uniquely in these studies, it goes on a bottom-up basis. So it says, what does every area in the country need in order to transition its waste management, its transport systems, its buildings, its energy, its skills, training, support? What does every area in the country need in order to achieve net zero? And what you find is that it needs a massive amount of work. It needs, as Nick said, your greatest resource, your people. So the findings here on the next slide show the scale of that potential for Leeds City region. So over the course of a 10-year transition, when you need this massive, big investment in big things in order to reduce emissions, but also improve livelihoods, we found a total of 30,000 jobs could be created over that 10-year period. In the longer term, once you've done your building retrofits, once you've completely changed your waste management systems and so on, you'll still have 16,000 jobs required to sustain that new economy. So that's a massive alternative on offer. And so I'll just talk through briefly some of those, what those look like in practice. So for example, the first sector there, reuse and recycling, we're assuming a massive increase in ambition in reducing your waste, increasing reuse, increasing recycling. So an estimate based on the shifting of to 90% recycling rates. And the requirement, these are all things that are really, really labor intensive. You need a massive injection of labor to make this type of thing happen. For transport, again, the huge requirements for a modal shift. Yes, there are some jobs lost in maintaining private vehicle maintenance, but that's factored in. This is net jobs. And so for transport, you need massive investment in building cycle routes, electrifying the rail network, installing vehicle charging points, in installing new rail infrastructure, in the drivers that are required, in the engineers that are required. These are all really jobs-rich environments. And then probably the most jobs-rich of them all that really stands out there, building retrofit, 21,000 jobs for Leeds City region. That's because you need to go door to door, street by street, over the next 10 years to retrofit almost every single building in the country. We have drafty buildings in the UK. People might be aware of that. When we talk about co-benefits from these things, it's not just jobs, and it's definitely not just reducing emissions. Fuel poverty in the UK is a massive problem. 12,000 people in the UK die every year from the health conditions that arise from having a cold home. And it costs the health service £850 million a year. So the return on your investment is massively dissipated to all these different areas of the economy. And I'll just show you on the next slide the argument that Alex put about how a Green New Deal for Leeds City region would diversify and dissipate jobs throughout the whole region. So yes, there's some concentration, but as you can see there, every authority in the region would benefit from such a program massively. Because like I say, when you need to retrofit someone's house, you have to go to that house. You cannot do it off-site. And a lot of these jobs require the same type of thing. I'm finishing up here, but I'll just have a couple of slides just to show just to envision what this would look like. A little bit of inspiration for the initiatives that are already in place for how to do it. This slide just shows, I think, the type of structural shift in the economy and how the economy works. So you can apply the lessons of the Preston model, community wealth building, you're strengthening local supply chains. So on the right-hand side, you've got what a circular economy would look like. And if you apply that to something like retrofitting, then you've got this massive green, the circles there, where you've got labor-intensive circulation of materials and energy and wealth. The money's not disappearing elsewhere. It's going round and round in the local economy and it's staying here. Next slide, please. Buses, I just thought this was a really good example. A lot of the transport jobs we forecast here in our model are bus drivers, and it does seem like a huge amount. So we're talking in the thousands, but you need a massive modal shift. And at the moment, there aren't even enough bus drivers to provide for the current, under-provided for sector. I'd also just make a point about the quality of jobs is really, really important when we're talking about green jobs, that it's not just any type of job as long as it's low carbon. There's a massive need for those jobs to be good quality, for there to be good labour representation in the workplace, and there's a need for just transition as well, so that people can get the skills, get the social protection they need to be able to move from maybe one type of work to another type of work. And what we found, particularly in the Gatwick report, we did a little bit more on this, there's a massive range of skills and expertise in an airport. And many of those skills are the same types of skills you would need for these types of jobs. To run a fast-growing and high-quality public transport network, you're going to need engineers, project managers, the backroom staff. You're going to need a lot of the same skills that exist in an airport now. Next slide, please. This is just an example of what a really nice retrofitted home looks like. So one of the first Passive House certified homes was built in the UK at Derby in Kirklees. So this is a really good example of what is already happening and what could be expanded and scaled up massively. And then final slide, just to reiterate that final finding of the report, 30,000 jobs created over a 10-year transition, 16,000 in the long term. At Greenhouse Think Tank and with Green New Deal UK, we've also thought to try and include, we haven't included it in the headline figure here, but it is in the report, really importantly, is care work. And that's, for us, is a really important part of a healthier, low carbon economy. It's a really endemically underprovided for sector. Paying conditions are very low. The social benefits of investing in that sector are huge. Just a 1% increase in GDP invested in the care sector in the UK would lead to 246,000 new full-time equivalent jobs. So scaled to Leeds City region, again, that would give a job creation potential of 11,000. So again, you can see the potential of a different investment model. I will finish up there. There is a lot more detail in the report, and happy to take any questions after the other speakers have spoken.
Robert, thank you very much for that very lucid introduction to the report. We're going to come in a moment to Pauline Bailey, who's the fourth of our speakers. Can I just say that, Robert, we've had a couple of the questions are coming into the chat line in a steady stream now. We've got a couple that we received in advance, and Alec, I'd like Robert to answer the first of those when Pauline Bailey has finished her contribution. And the question is, where's the money coming from to pay for the economic transition? So you may be wanting now to marshal some arguments in order to answer that. And Alex, if you're still able to be with us, I know you have to leave at 3, but if you can still be with us, it would be helpful also to have your views on that question, who pays. So having said that, can I introduce Pauline Bailey, who is Secretary of the Leeds Trade Union Council? The Leeds TUC have a strong focus on climate issues and also have a crucial role in ensuring that we get a just and a fair transition, that nobody's left behind in this transition from a high emissions, high carbon economy to one that works for everyone. So Pauline, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Chris, I'm Pauline Bailey, Secretary of Leeds Trade Union Council. For anybody who doesn't know, trades councils are set up on a branch level of trade unions, and in Leeds, our affiliated branches represent best part of 25,000 trade union members. So, you know, it's fairly big concern. Delegates from the branches meet monthly to discuss trade union issues in and around Leeds, and we share knowledge and expertise to support each other's struggles. We have an environmental subcommittee, and it's very much at the centre of planning and funding the COP26 activities in Leeds on November the 6th, along with the Yorkshire and Humberside COP26 coalition. So Leeds TUC is proud to endorse this report from GALBA calling for a Green New Deal for the Leeds region. Leeds TUC has opposed the expansion of the airport since the planning application was submitted, and we put in our own objection and we donated to the GALBA campaign. There's a great concern, therefore, when Leeds City Council approved the planning application, not least because the council had declared a climate emergency only 2 years before. It seems Leeds City Council want to hide behind the idea that extra airplane emissions don't matter if they're counted on a national basis, and not caring about the extra noise and pollution that Leeds people would have to suffer. Leeds TUC, like GALBA, had many criticisms of the planning application, and not least the suggestion that jobs would be created if the airport expands. So we welcome GALBA's timely research showing that the airport's job projection figures can be challenged and are shown to be exaggerated. Leeds TUC shares the vision outlined in the report, showing how sustainable green jobs can and must be created if the climate change threat is to be successfully challenged. Now, we'd go further and say these jobs need to be paid at a minimum £15 per hour and be unionised and be part of planned projects encompassing training in local colleges and encouraging local manufacturing, as Alex said in his contribution. And there should be a big involvement of public procurement here. Just looking at retrofitting, it can be seen how secure permanent green jobs can be developed, which help the local economy, that would help to end fuel poverty and lower the use of energy. So all of these ideas, they tick all the boxes, and they're the only viable solution if we're to save the planet and provide a future for humanity. Leeds TUC has started a series of meetings with Leeds City Council senior leadership to try to begin to develop some of these ideas locally. And we're aware that GALBA's planning to meet with the unions who've got members at the airport to have discussions to bring them on board and answer any understandable fears that rejecting the airport expansions is removing the provision of jobs in the locality. So we'd very much like to be part of those discussions. We have recently launched a project called Leeds Gets Organised. The plan is to help people in low-paid, precarious jobs, particularly in hospitality, to get into unions and be part of fighting for better pay and conditions. That's been put back a little bit recently with unforeseen circumstances, but once that gets going again, we would very much want to include the airport staff in that project. We're also aware that work needs to be done with many trade unions on a regional and national level to get them to see the need for a just transition and not just to respond to climate issues with a knee-jerk reaction looking to save jobs at any cost. Our delegates are currently pushing these ideas up through the union bureaucracy. There's been some success in this area with one local Unite branch getting their union regionally and nationally to want to open discussions in Leeds and to look at implementing the demands of a just transition. So this is a really positive development, an example for other unions to follow. So to finish, it's clear that GALBA and Leeds TUC have a lot of common ground when it comes to looking at job situation at the airport. So we welcome this report being launched today and thank GALBA again for the work and effort that's gone into its production. We look forward to be able to continue to work together in the future and wish GALBA every success in its determination to stop the expansion of the airport. Thanks.
Pauline, thank you very much. That's very helpful. We're going to come to the questions now, and Clancy, who is helping to moderate this conversation, will ask the questions. I think that we may have lost Alex to some childcare duties, Alex Sobel. So, as I hinted earlier, if the first question, i.e., who's going to pay for the transition, can we have Robert's contribution there? Are you happy with that, Robert?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So yeah, this is always the big question, isn't it? But there's no denying that a Green New Deal, properly conceived, requires significant investment at a national level from central government. But it comes back, as I said, to economic choices. So the current subsidy, as I said, amounts to 7 billion a year from central government. As Finley's pointed out in the chat, there are many other routes by which subsidies reach airlines and airports. During the pandemic, there was 38 billion euro of public support that went to keep the airlines alive in the EU, often for justifiable reasons in cases and with strings attached in some other cases. But that collectively, that public support for the aviation industry overwhelmingly benefits the very small number of people who take the vast majority of flights. If you look at globally, 89% of the global population almost never fly. 1% of the global population cause 50% of aviation emissions. And in the UK, just 15% of people take 70% of flights. And so what are you subsidizing that industry for? What are you putting that investment there for? And our plan, our vision shows that when you invest in green jobs and infrastructure, it's not for its own sake. There's this long list of social and economic returns, co-benefits. You get better insulated homes, you reduce fuel poverty, you get more public transport, you reduce pollution, you create healthier streets, you improve the quality of social care, improves quality of life, not just for elderly people, but the entire communities. And of course, the big picture, you avoid the astronomical cost of the worst impacts of climate change and weather disasters. And that will affect the aviation industry as well. So that's what we're asking for. We're asking for planning to be put in place by the industry, by government, to prepare. And expansion is not that. And I would just come back. There's a John Maynard Keynes, the economist. There's a quote that just says, "We can afford what we can do." It doesn't mean you can do anything, but it does mean you can do what you have the resources for. And GALBA's vision concludes here that a Green New Deal for Leeds would deploy the people, the most precious of those resources. So it is absolutely possible to do it.
Thank you very much, Robert. Clancy, you're going to ask the next advanced question and invite, I think, Nick to answer it.
I will do. The first question came in while Robert was speaking, and I don't think it's been covered yet, from John. What are the relative health costs and benefits of LBA's expansion compared with the proposed plan locally?
Yeah, maybe I can start, and then Nick could come in on this point, because, like I said, ours is a vision. It shows what's possible, what job creation is possible. It can't be directly compared to that extent as like one blueprint versus another for the region. But undoubtedly, as I've explained, when you look across the board of the types of investment we're talking about, you are going to get significant health benefits that come from more active lifestyles and stronger, more resilient communities with that wealth circulation happening among them. That's not going to be the case to the same extent with investment in capital infrastructure, in construction and so on. But perhaps Nick, you could talk more about the pollution impact locally of the airport, or someone from GALBA, sorry.
Well, I'm certainly no health expert, but I think that, as well as the points that Robert made, an expansion of flying means an increase in health damaging noise and an increase in air pollution. So actually not expanding the airport, regardless of the number of jobs, which is our focus today, but just looking at the direct health impacts on people who live near to the airport or under the flight path, that would be more health damaging. I think the second point is, as Robert said, if we included investment to repair the limitations on our health and social care services, by investing properly in those services, not only would that create, I think we estimated around 11,000 more jobs, it would do a hell of a lot of good, both for the people like me who receive care and for the people who work in it, because it would create better terms and conditions, hopefully higher pay, and generally a more secure job. Because I know for the fact the number of care workers do it for the love, and certainly don't do it for the money. So I think that side of the investment and regarding that as a necessary part of building a sustainable economy is actually really important.
Thanks, Nick. I've just had a couple more of the advanced questions. We will come to those that have asked in the chat as well. One of the questions that somebody had emailed in, aviation only emits a small percentage of CO2 globally. Why pick on it as the main problem?
Right, shall I go? It's true that globally, and even within the UK, aviation is a relatively small part of the total emissions picture. It's about 7% in the UK, and that's only if you exclude the non-CO2 effects, so it would be larger, probably near 10%, if you include the non-CO2 climate damaging effects. But perhaps the most important reason to focus on aviation is that it's one of two or three incredibly hard sectors to stop emitting greenhouse gases. It is a very, very difficult industry to decarbonise. All of the proposals that the industries come up with, well-meaning and hopefully successful in the long term as they may be, just ain't going to happen quick enough to stop us hitting the worst effects of a climate emergency. The single most important point for my mind is that we have to cut our emissions in half by 2030. And there is absolutely no prospect of that happening in the aviation industry. The aviation industry's plans for the next 10 years are entirely based around offsetting and very small planes, that, as was mentioned, that could be run on electric batteries. But the challenge for long-haul international flights, which creates about 95% of all UK aviation greenhouse gas emissions, you can do nothing about that in the next 10 years unless you actually control it or reduce it. So that's why it's incredibly important. Secondly, it's incredibly important because a lot of people's jobs depend on it. So let's be honest, those jobs need to be a transition for those jobs into something else that is sustainable, but still good quality, decent pay, good conditions. We need to plan that. It's not going to happen by accident. That has to be planned, invested in, and managed. And the earlier we do that, the better, which is why, frankly, we're so concerned about suggestions, not just in Leeds Bradford, but around the country, that airports want to expand. It's selling people a false hope. Those jobs either are going to make everybody's life worse as we struggle to control the climate crisis, or they're going to disappear and leave people who've been promised those jobs in a complete mess with no plan for them to get better work elsewhere. So I think aviation is justifiably a focus of concern.
Can I briefly come in on this as well, Nick? Because yes, it's hard for aeroplanes to decarbonise, and the technological changes are seemingly very far in the future. But it's an easy thing for individual people to do, and it's not an expensive thing. Some of the things that individuals are being asked to do now, like put a heat pump on the outside of your house, are very expensive. insulating the outside of your house will cost you in excess of £10,000. But there are easy and quick things that you can do to reduce your personal carbon emission footprint. Just eat a bit less meat. Just don't fly as often as you fly, and those are the low-hanging fruits, and we need to be taking those. That's the end of my point. Clancy, I wonder if it would be better to move.
Question. Yeah.
I was just wondering if it'd be better to move on to the chat questions now, rather.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've got there. If we've got time, there's one more advanced question, but I'm going to go on.
I think we can.
Joe
I think we can go on past 3 o'clock, can't we?
Well, we'll see. We've still got 66 of us here, so we'll continue.
Well, I think we should go on for as long as people want to go on then.
Okay, I'm going to go to Joe Foster's question now. If airports and airlines succeed in expanding their facilities and number of flights, what will happen when inevitably air travel is forced to contract? Will they come begging for a bailout from the government because they are too big to fail? In inverted commas, or will they collapse and leave us with no aviation industry at all? Surely what is needed is carefully managed contraction of the industry starting now. There is a question mark at the end of
that. I suspect, Robert, you might be best placed to answer that, at least initially.
I feel like that one's sort of been answered in the comments you just gave, and Nick. But I see you're not in there. I had my eye on the question about worker initiatives. Would I be okay to come in to jump to that one?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it was Emily. Yeah, and Finley's just replied there. So another bit of work that I've been doing with the Stay Grounded network, who are a group of campaigners all around the world who campaigning for a rapid and just decrease in aviation consumption and in the size of the industry. That the piece of work we've been working on with them is about trying to guide environmental campaigners, local anti-airport expansion campaigners and so on, to better engage with trade unions and with workers. There's a massive gap between the two, obviously, for very understandable reasons. They exist across the economy. There's always this dichotomy that's supposed between the two. But that engagement absolutely needs to happen because you need the expertise, you need the skills of workers. People like Finley, who head up this group called Safe Landing, that's just emerged over the last year, which is just so important. There's another group in France, which is similar, a group of engineers who are facing up to the reality of the difficulty of the technological transition that Nick talked about, and are calling on their industry to do more. So that engagement absolutely needs to happen. It's really difficult to do, and that's why local voices like Pauline's are so important, and trades councils. We engage the Trades Council for the Gatwick report. We try to engage the local reps at Gatwick Airport. We co-published the report with PCS trade union, who represent air traffic controllers, but we did speak to others, GMB and Unite and so on. But it is a serious challenge, and there's a huge amount of work to be done to improve that engagement. I hope that more of it can happen. For this report, of course, we've reached out to trade unionists, and Alex Sobel, I think it was mentioned at the start, is going to hopefully organise a meeting with them to try and build on this, because you're exactly right. It needs to build on the expertise and the perspective of workers. They need to have agency, if not leadership of the process, at the absolute very least, agency in determining the direction of it, and in determining where their future jobs and livelihoods are best suited.
I wonder if I can just attempt to answer Joe Foster's question. I think he deserves an answer. Just to remind people, he says, what will happen when inevitably air travel is forced to contract? Will they come begging for a handout from the government because they're, quotes, too big to fail? Well, Flybe was allowed to collapse and was quite a big player, but the government didn't rescue it. I've just noticed that they are attempting a comeback. and it may be that they've reformulated themselves into a smaller operation. And so, yes, I think the answer is that they shouldn't be getting a bailout from the government, because they're already getting bailouts from the government in the shape of massive tax concessions. And we need to be not just GALBA, not just Leeds City Council, but we need to be part of a large movement influencing government of all parties to say aviation doesn't get a free pass. Joe, I hope that's some answer to your question. I don't know if Nick's got anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, just one. I mean, I think, like I said before, we have to have a planned and invested in transition. But just, personal reminiscence. I was a welfare rights worker for many years, which means basically helping people to claim benefits they're entitled to and sorting out debts that they can't avoid. So my first job was in Wakefield District, and I spent a lot of time dealing with the consequences of the last unplanned energy transition when the miners were taken to the cleaners by the government at the time. So loads of the communities that I used to work in were the victims of a completely unplanned economic transition, and that stuck with me over the years. And I think if we can do anything at all to prevent that sort of chaos and poverty and distress from happening again, it is our responsibility to do it, which is why I think we have to be flagging this up now and not waiting till it's too late.
Yeah.
Could I just add one tiny point to that, which is that like the aviation industry has just gone through a massive tumultuous year, and as I said, you've got 40% of jobs at risk globally, 190,000 across Europe, jobs lost. So that by definition is an unjust transition. You had people on temporary contracts at Leeds Bradford Airport who were being made redundant really quickly, and you have fire and rehire happening across airports. So it's exactly what the planning for a just transition needs to do that's exactly why it needs to be put in place to avoid that type of approach to transition, which is just chaotic and does nothing for the workers in the industry.
Thank you.
Just would like to check if so that was Emily's question that was answered before. Finlay has made a couple of comments, but there is a question in there. It was asked of Alex or somebody else if Alex isn't here. You're right in saying that battery hydrogen electric aircraft would be far smaller and short range aircraft. Leeds Bradford Airport and others are not designed, there was a correction there, not designed for a large amount of these aircraft or being expanded on this basis. Have you put it to the aircraft owners that they're building the wrong type of airport and should pause expansion until they've figured out what the airports of the future will look like?
I wonder if Finlay is still with us, whether it would be worth inviting him to address his own question, because I'm conscious that he knows a lot more about these issues than most of us do, and I very much welcome to have a direct input from Finlay if you're able to contribute, Finlay. I don't know. Can I see your face?
Yeah, I can just explain the question really. The government's if you can hear me, the government's talking a lot about zero emissions aircraft, which would be batteries or hydrogen. But the physical characteristics of that. So I'm an engineer that was working on future aircraft design. So the volume and the weight of those storage mediums mean the aircraft will need to be a lot smaller and have a lot smaller range, and basically also go a lot slower and lower altitude. So that means that it kind of puts into question the design of a lot of our airports, as they are, because they're designed for long-range jet engine aircraft, as Alex, the MP, was saying. So one of the things, I gave evidence at the Bristol Airport inquiry, and Bristol Airport couldn't answer to this question because they were talking about electric, they were talking about hydrogen. But when I put to them that they'd need like 5 times the number of aircraft because of the fact the aircraft are a lot smaller and they probably couldn't all take off on the same runway, and they probably better with a smaller runway and completely different airport terminals. They couldn't really answer that question. And it might be worth saying, if Leeds Bradford are talking about those sort of aircraft, theoretically, just put it to them that the infrastructure is wrong. And because we don't understand what these aircraft are actually going to look like yet, it seems sensible from a business point of view to pause expansion until we understand what that future of air travel looks like. So hopefully that explains kind of where I'm coming from, but I suppose I'm wondering whether you put that to the airport owners at Leeds Bradford, or if you'd consider doing that.
Yeah, I don't know if Nick wants to come in on that. I don't think that we've had that conversation with the airport, and I doubt very much if they're thinking that far ahead. It's a source of great sorrow to us that the government, in the shape of the Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, seems to believe in the immediate availability of these technologies, which don't yet exist in any kind of scale. And it seems to me, having read some of your work, Finlay, that if people were to produce as much so-called sustainable aircraft fuel as their high-tech transition would require, then it would be in direct competition in terms of land space to grow the base fuels from. And you know, we have to decide: are we going to grow food? Are we going to grow food, or are we going to grow aircraft fuel?
Yeah, so that's a slightly different issue again, because basically what that's saying is electric and hydrogen aren't going to be ready. We're going to stick with the aircraft we've currently got and the infrastructure we've currently got, and therefore we need these alternative fuels. And then there's big issues around those. So yes, you're right, those fuels aren't going to be available in scale, and that's the problem with those. And that's probably why we need to switch how we travel and fly a lot less far when we do fly, and slower and all these sort of things. But that involves different infrastructure. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes eminent sense to me. And also there's the problem of timing, that this is the decade that is crucial if we're going to limit climate change. The 8 years we've got left between now and 2030 is the crucial time, and these technologies are not going to come to market in the next 8 years.
Can I just add, if I've understood Finlay right, I think what you're saying is that there could be, I don't know, maybe more small airports that link to the larger airports as the hubs, and that could be the way that Leeds Bradford or other regional airports end up going, and that they would therefore be more dependent on electric or hydrogen flight for shorter distances for smaller numbers. Does that sound about what you're saying? Because if it is, my strong suspicion is that the last people Leeds Bradford airport owners would take that message from is us. They might from you, but I don't think they'd want to hear it from us.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just meaning they might be saying that they're going to do that, and they might be saying that they use these aircraft, but it's worth pointing out to them the airport is wrong for those. And if they do want to expand and they are using that as a reason, these technologies, then it's worth saying that they've got the wrong type of airport, and they certainly shouldn't expand the current type of airport because it's the wrong type.
A point made by Joe Foster here, which was one that occurred to me: if you're reliant on small, short-range airplanes, why not just get on the train? And that strikes me as a sensible comment to make. Clancy, have we got another question lined up?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, Chris, I have just posted in the chat, but a lot of questions, people have been very helpful in answering some of the questions as we've gone along. And there's also some really useful information in the chat. So people can obviously copy it themselves, but if people would like a copy of the chat, they can reply to the email that they will have just received with a link to the report, and we'll make sure that people can get a copy of the chat, because there's some really, really useful information in there. I think we might go to the final question then, if that's all right, which was an advanced question,
Sure.
Which was going back up. How does your report fit with the outcome of COP26?
Nick, do you want to start on this?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah. Well, COP26 was, let's face it, a bit disappointing, but there were still some useful statements made in that Glasgow Pact. One of which was we need to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Well, you know, I would argue very strongly, firstly, that aviation is a government fossil fuel subsidy because it's not taxed apart from air passenger duty, which the government has just decided to reduce for domestic flights. And also, it's incredibly inefficient. We can, well, business has just learned during the pandemic that you don't actually have to fly to New York for a day's meeting and fly back again. You can do it just as well by Zoom like we're doing right now. We also know that the great majority of people, the great majority of flights, and therefore the great majority of greenhouse gas emissions caused by those flights are caused by a pretty small proportion of the UK and the global population. Though that small proportion also, unsurprisingly, turns out to be better off financially. So if that isn't an inefficient fossil fuel subsidy, then I don't know what is. I think there was a really strong case to be made for the proper taxation, perhaps with a frequent flyer levy or some other measure that targets the people who take the majority of flights and cause the majority of the emissions from those flights. So that would be, I think, one way that our report is saying, yeah, look, we have to get serious about this, you know. We have to start looking for an alternative way to travel. We have to look at an alternative taxation system on aviation. And we have to start creating more meaningful long-term jobs that actually tackle the crisis instead of increasing our dependency on it. So that would be my two pence. I don't know if anybody else has a thought on that.
I have one thought, which is that aviation is really a microcosm of a larger question. It's a smaller part of a larger question in that we continue in the UK, and I think probably throughout the Western world, to subsidise the least sustainable ways of living and forms of transport. So we've got a road building programme in the UK, which is going to cost us, is it 27 billion? I think the government may have scaled it back, trimmed it back a tiny bit, but we're still prioritising cars over trains. We're still prioritising oil over anything else. And we're giving the biggest concessions and the biggest tax breaks to the people who are working hardest to screw up all our futures, and so here we are at GALBA nibbling away at one tiny corner of the problem, but we need to always bear in mind that it's part of a much bigger problem and a much bigger question. Does anyone else, Robert? You just demuted, so I'm guessing you're going to come in.
Oh, very very briefly, because I know we want to finish, but I was just going to add to that like context of COP, there's going to be a continuing ratchet mechanism that just isn't going to stop. And the policies to reduce emissions are just going to need to get stronger and stronger and stronger over the course of this decade and next decade and so on. So that goes along with the habits that are going to change. So Nick talked about business travel. In the report, we point out that 66% of business travelers responding to a survey expected to travel less, but also government policy is going to change. And it's likely that they're going to be more, that there's going to be a fairer tax treatment for aviation. It's likely there's going to be more restrictions on expansion elsewhere. It's likely that there will be things like frequent flyer levy. It's likely that you'll have policies like they have in France, where they've banned flights under 2.5 hours that can be done by train. So all of these things are, to a certain extent at least, just going to happen, and that is going to change the landscape that the aviation industry works in. So it just emphasizes how important it is to plan ahead for that.
Thank you very much for that. Well, it's nearly 3:15, so we've run over our ending time a little bit. I hope nobody minded. It just leaves it to me to make some very quick points about what this was about. And the points that we'd like people to take home are these. one, the secure jobs and environmental protection are not in opposition to each other, and we can achieve both. And preventing the climate catastrophe that we're looking at, if we can prevent that, we can provide a lot of secure, good, fulfilling, well-paid jobs in that work. Thirdly, that the aviation workers who've been hit so hard by the pandemic, they have to be thought about. They have to be looked after. What we don't want to do is to do what the government did to the mine workers in the late 80s, which was just to throw them on the scrap heap without any kind of thought about replacing the work that they were doing. And that goes for aviation workers now. So the research, I want to underline the point that's one of the key points in the document. We could have around 16,000 jobs in the Leeds City region if we do what we're suggesting. So I would like to thank very quickly all of the speakers this afternoon. Thank you for your time and your contributions. All of those who contributed and worked to the production of the document, especially Robert and Alison Pilling, who I think is with us or was with us and made a huge contribution to writing the report. Thank you to her. Thank you to Clancy Walker for helping to moderate the discussion this afternoon. Very briefly, there was a question from Deborah about getting the questions and the answers in the chat. Clancy, do you know if the chat is, you've got your hand up, will the chat be made available ex post facto, as it were?
Absolutely. I mean, if people did want to copy it themselves, bearing in mind this copies any direct messages that you've had with people from your own chat, but you can click into the chat, Control-A, Control-C, and then Control-V into wherever you want. It doesn't, as a keyboard shortcut. We will get a copy of this automatically comes to me. The email, and a very good point has been made, that the email you will have received and previous ones about the event shows no reply at event.eventbrite.com, but rather confusingly, if you actually click reply, it auto directs through to the GALBA email address. So please do reply to that. We won't automatically send the chat to everybody. Not everybody will want that. So I think that's probably the best way to do it, is if you would like a copy of the chat.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to take some of the questions and answers from chat and post them onto the GALBA website. And it's worth saying that the GALBA website is a valuable resource. I hope people keep an eye on it because we try to keep everyone as up to date as possible with our site. So thanks again. Clancy, I think we can end the meeting at that point. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.